is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
This is Screen Watching. It's our weekly deep dive into what we've been watching on screens. Now, the big screens, the small screens, that's basically TV and movies and other stuff. And you watch movies on small screens and TV on big screens now. It's very confusing. Boys are girls, girls are boys, men are women. Who even knows what's happening anymore? I don't, but I'm aroused at the idea of all of that. Simon Foster, Boy Wonder, how are you?
All right, I'll pick it up from here, Dan Barrett. Thank you. I'm very well. Hope all the other screen watchers are doing very well. It's the Oscar season. The award season has petered out. We're now just chilling in the basking in the glory of that wonderful night a few nights ago as we record this, where a whole bunch of millionaires patted themselves on the back. We have, between you and I, gone over the Oscars a little bit in our tweets and in your newsletter, and we've had a bit of a thought. It's generally, we were kind of happy with it, weren't we? It sort of played out a little bit stiff and a bit formal, I guess, as the Oscars should be, but there were some laughs and there wasn't too many surprises, but it wasn't a bad show.
Look, when you say you're basking in the glory, do you mean basking in the completely getting it wrong that Oppenheimer would not win Best Picture? Because, boy, that was out there when you said it, and it hasn't held up well.
I'll tell you what, no, it hasn't aged well, but I will say that when American Fiction won screenplay, which neither of us had seen at the point of recording last week's show, but have now both seen. I know you're going to mention it a bit later in the show, but when it won the screenplay award, and then Anatomy of a Fall and Poor Things started to pick up a few along the way, I thought, okay, so this isn't going to be the Oscar sweep that the Oppenheimer sweep that many of us thought. In the end, it kind of was, because it pretty much cleaned up all those big categories that it was nominated for. But, I'll stand by it. I think my Anatomy of a Fall, which I picked for Best Screenplay, had certainly held its own against the might of Oppenheimer, as did a couple of the other films. It was great to see Poor Things win all those tech and craft categories, which I thought was where Barbie might have picked up made up for a bit of the bad stuff. But hey, here we are, post-Oscar season. Now we're into the crappy films for the next couple of months until the American summer comes around.
Okay, so it's only another 10 months of crappy films until a few good things come out. Gotcha. So, look, Simon, the one thing, and I mentioned this in my newsletter, but I'm going to regurgitate it here because I appreciate different audiences, not always the same people. The one thing that I felt, and I think this really speaks to why Barbie didn't really pick up that much, is that as you watch the ceremony, as you watch the show that was put to wear, as you watch what was winning, what wasn't winning, I think it became really, really apparent to me that 2024 is a year of conservatism, and it isn't the progressive Oscars that we've seen maybe the last sort of 5 or so years. So in the last couple of years, we've seen, all sorts of things. Like if you think about, say, Moonlight winning, for example, or Parasite, a foreign language drama, like it really seemed as though as the Academy opened up its voting to international members to participate in, as it broadened the idea of what the Academy was, we started to see things get a little bit sort of wilder. But I do think that if you just think about where the world is right now, it feels as though we're moving into a bit of conservatism where it's, I guess maybe it comes from being sort of less confident about the world moving in a very sort of forward direction. And at the moment, it's about, gathering your sticks and your leaves and just consolidating. And that very much felt like the Academy Awards. And so when we were watching the show, not only was it the very sort of traditional, very safe sort of movies where it was kind of like embracing almost all the things that were throwbacks. So Oppenheimer is a film that, look, it could easily have been made 15 years ago and still feel as though it would be the same film that you'd see today. It was a very conservative pick. Anatomy of a Fall, we were talking about this on the show last week. That is a French legal drama that is, just a better version of LA Law, effectively, but, French and, thematically maybe a little bit more interesting than most LA Laws, but still kind of hewed to a very sort of familiar storytelling take. Even Poor Things, as bold and audacious as that could be in some elements of it, it was still a Frankenstein story at heart, very conservative for an audacious film. Like, it's not The Shape of Water. Like, that was a pretty wild movie. Like, there was nothing like that here. It was
Yeah,
all
look,
just very safe. Even going
don't
down to the awards itself, where, like the award show, like Kimmel was incredibly conservative. Like, the show
sure.
was just conservative from top to bottom.
I don't disagree with your point of view on Oppenheimer. I would say that in this day and age, specifically in this day and age, when the wars are raging around the world and the threat of nuclear war is at a premium, I thought the opportunity was there, and some of the award winners picked it up and mentioned. It was Cillian Murphy who said we're living in an Oppenheimer world, so he made reference to the relevance of the story in a very contemporary terms. But I don't disagree with the fact that yes, there was a general air of, if not conservatism, then maybe just playing it safe with some of the monologuing and he had the crack at Trump later in the show with the Truth Social joke and which I thought landed pretty well, but there wasn't a whole lot of politics in the broadcast. It was a split of playing the joke sort of for the room as well as for the broader international audience. So but I think you're right. I think it was a safe ceremony.
Yeah, that playing it safe is the same thing as conservatism, right? It's the same word. But anyway.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Look, the one thing that really sort of frustrated me with the award show was the reading of that Trump tweet. I just don't think the show really needed it. And, it just came out of nowhere, and I'm sure it amused them behind the scenes. But, that frustrated me. But what frustrated me more than that was the news coverage over, the next day. Well, the news coverage the next day where everyone's like, oh, Jimmy Kimmel did what the producers didn't want him to do. And I was thinking, no, the producer is the person that produces his nightly TV program, who he's got a very good relationship with, a relationship that's so good to the point that it's his wife. The idea the producers didn't want you to do that. It's like his wife said, hey, maybe don't do that. And he's like, no, I think I'm going to do it. It's not a, him against the system sort of a thing. She had the job because she's his EP.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just thought it was a bit dumb. But anyway.
All right. So, on the Screen Watching podcast, of which we are part of today, we have a heady mix of reviews. And boy, there is a lot of stuff to review this week. We're going to have to whip through them. You'll be looking at the new TV series Girls on the Bus, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm dying to because I've heard great things about it. I'm looking at the new Kristen Stewart film, Love Lies Bleeding. Boy, I've got a few things to say about
Simon.
that.
Simon, question. Yeah. Who's saying good things about Girls on the Bus? Because that is not the conversation out there, but let's go on.
Oh, no, I'm hearing great things about it. I'm hearing some terrific reviews coming down through the trades, as they say. A film that isn't getting a lot of good reviews. A film that hasn't got too many great reviews is Miller's Girl, the new film starring Jenna Ortega. I'll be having a look at that. A South Korean horror film called Exuma. As I mentioned previously, you're doing American Fiction, and a show called Manhunt, which I know nothing about. A very interesting intermission where we're going to generally look at what happened to some of the stars who could have been from yesteryear. This Week in History, the birthday quiz. It's a very packed screen watching.
It stinks.
Hey, Simon, have you seen the cover of Rolling Stone?
No. Should I have? Oh, this is the Kristen Stewart one.
It's an actual question, Simon.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Very sexy.
Yeah. I was watching the Colbert Report the other night. Sorry, it's not Colbert Report. It's the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And he's like, CBS didn't want me showing you this cover. I can't understand what that's about. A bit disingenuous because she seems to be, how does one even say this on a family-friendly podcast, the sorts of which we operate here, diddling herself.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that is a fairly specific reference captured for the Rolling Stone magazine cover to her new film, Love Lies Bleeding. Beautiful segue, Dan Barrett. There are a number of scenes in this movie in which Kristen Stewart and her on-screen partner, played by Katy O'Brien, I think it's pronounced, indulge in, how shall we say, spectacularly sapphic moments of pleasuring each other. I think you can say it that way. It's quite a graphic film. Not only graphic in its portrayal of lesbian love, but also in its depiction of small-town film noir violence. What you have with Love Lies Bleeding is a real nightmarish version of a romantic story in which Kristen Stewart goes very bare bones in her appearance and turns into a kind of a fragile but also very sort of hard-edged character. She plays a woman named I want to get the name right. She plays Lou, who runs a local gym that is owned by her father, Ed Harris, who is one of the nastiest pieces of work you'll see on screen in a long time. Into this small Nevada town comes Jackie, played by Katy O'Brien, a bodybuilder who's just sort of passing through town and trying to make her way to a bodybuilding competition in Las Vegas. The two ladies bump into each other. There's an instant attraction. Unfortunately, Lou sort of sets Jackie on the path of steroids, and these steroids have a terrible impact on the rather unstable mentality of Jackie. Meanwhile, Jackie has taken a job with Lou's father out on the local gun range, which is really just a front for his nefarious underworld operations. And very soon there's a lot of bloodshed, not least of which is inflicted upon young Dave Franco, who plays a mullet-wearing, wife-beating scumbag who gets everything he is due in this film, and then some, and all for the benefits of the camera and the audience watching. There were some notable oh my gods in the audience of fairly hardened critics when I saw this a couple of weeks ago. So what unfolds is essentially a love story between Lou and Jackie, but also this undercurrent of menace and conflict that is set up between the three of them, Lou and Jackie and Ed Harris's bad guy. It's all directed by Rose Glass. I think I do want to get that right because she's an incredible filmmaker. Yeah, she made Saint Maud a few years back, which was one of the more striking and nightmarish horror films of the time. She dabbles a little bit in the supernatural in here, which is maybe saying a little bit too much because it's a very minor part of the film, but the ending for this may throw you a little bit in that it dabbles not so much into the supernatural, I should say more sort of the fantasy of the two girls and the love they share that is touched upon. Be warned, graphic sex, graphic violence, but also terrific character performances from the two leads. And also in there, it's great to see Jenna Malone, who's grown into a sort of a 30-something style actress as the put-upon wife of Dave Franco. She has some great scenes as well. Really like this film. Once again, hard to recommend to the general viewing public because it has some fairly tough moments, but it certainly signifies the direction that Kristen Stewart is continually taking herself and the roles she chooses. And as a follow-up film for Rose Glass, it really makes it clear to the world that she's a filmmaker to watch. So it's called Love Lies Bleeding in fairly limited release, but well worth seeking out if you want a bit of challenging, bracing, big screen entertainment.
Yeah. Okay, well, Simon, I'm going to take you back to 1972. Is that all right?
Sure. I was a whopping 5 years old, and you weren't even born.
Okay, well, no, I certainly wasn't. But back in 1972, a book came out. It was called The Boys on the Bus. Largely it was by Timothy Krause, and he was a political reporter who was talking about the various reporters who were on the road with him on the bus as they traveled around covering the Nixon campaign. So he was a Rolling Stone reporter, and he had people with him along the lines of, say, Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote the foreword for the book as well. But anyway, The Boys on the Bus, it's kind of one of those seminal political novels. Cut to 2024, and we've got a brand new HBO Max. Sorry, no, it's just Max. It's a Max original. It's called The Girls on the Bus. Let's play a clip.
Here we are. 4 political reporters. Rivals. Vicious competitors. Getting entirely out of control. Why? Because the state of American politics is the state of our own lives.
So The Girls on the Bus, look, This is a difficult one to talk about. So probably the best way to really think about this program is, first of all, the premise of it is that you got 4 female journalists who are all at various sort of stages of age and different areas of the political spectrum and different media operators who all band together, bound by the fact that they're political reporters who find themselves on the same political bus, traveling around, dealing with the presidential campaign. So it's very much a throwback to the boys on the bus, and they do acknowledge this as a plot point in it, where the main character, well, ostensibly the main character, Sadie McCarthy, she is in love with the ghost of Hunter S. Thompson and sort of reveres him. There's a picture of him on her desk, and it's a bit weird because she's not really a gonzo-style journalist at all by any means. I don't quite understand the connection there entirely. But it does mean that every so often in a show, she talks to a fictional embodiment of Hunter S. Thompson, which is just kind of strange. It's from an entirely different program. So that's the premise of the show, and giving you the cast as well, you've got Melissa Benoist, who people best know as Supergirl from the TV show Supergirl. You got Natasha Benham, who I'm unfamiliar with, but she plays this character Lola, who's a Instagram, well, a TikTok style influencer, blogger type. Carla Gugino, who, you know, people know from her being Carla Gugino. She's been in things for years and years. She's the sort of older, grizzled journo on the campaign trail. She's very much a Sadie McCarthy type, but, you know, just 20 years older. And then you've also got Christina Elmore, who's the Fox News type reporter, although in this show it's, I think, Liberty Media is the name of the channel. But anyway, so she's the conservative. The other 3 are fairly liberal in their political persuasions. Anyway, you see... And look, this is probably the best entry point into the program, which is in the opening sections. It is a type of TV that we haven't really seen on the air for maybe like 10 years or so now, with good reason, because we all mocked it mercilessly for a while, which is, it's Sadie McCarthy, as played by Melissa Benoist. She's there, she's getting arrested outside of a political event that's taking place. I'm pretty sure it's election night. And she's getting arrested, and she pretty much gives you won't believe how I got here sort of an intro. So it's very much an in media res flashback now to 7 months ago as we see everyone meet each other. And that's the kind of show that this is. This is the kind of show that used to be on TV in the mid to late 90s going into the 2000s. A lot of this programming came from like the CW and the WB back in the day. It's very glossy, it's very shiny, it's very sort of youth focused. But also you started seeing this sort of style emulated a little bit by, there were a few Fox dramas in the early 2000s that were a bit like this, a lot of ABC dramas. It's very network in its approach. And what we've got here is what should be a fairly interesting topical series of the moment, with 4 women who are, as I said, all differently politically persuaded, who are looking at the politics of the moment. The thing is, and this speaks to the fact that it's a throwback style, this is a series that doesn't make sense in 2024. It's a show that obviously takes place in our real world, because they talk about the changes to abortion laws in the US. They talk about just various other sort of cultural aspects where political life is sort of seeped in. But they never reference Trump at all. Like, as far as I'm aware, Trump doesn't exist as a figure in this world. They seem to still think that Twitter is a important, viable medium that they really need to be paying attention to. It is just this TV show that's out of time. And it's really, really bizarre. And you also watch it, and it's very featherweight, and you said earlier that all the trades are loving it. That's not been the case at all. Everyone said that it's fine, but all of them are calling out the fact that this is a show that is out of time. And you notice this from the opening minute, the in media res, through to pretty much every scene. It doesn't feel as though the people who've written this actually are connected with the world that they're in. It's almost like they have been sent out into a bubble and then allowed to repopulate in the modern year for like about 15 minutes before they sat in front of their WordPresses. It is a strange, odd program. And it's a bit of a shame, because I kind of like the idea of a lightweight, fun, political show like this. Like, Journalists on a Bus like that is actually a pretty fun setup for a program.
I was about to
Look,
say...
Melissa Benoist, I love. I think she's charming, but she doesn't really feel like she's got the gravity for what they're trying to ask her character to be. She's very surface, and there just isn't really quite enough there. Carla Gugino is pretty much spot on, and like she's always spot on. Like you'd never find a note wrong with Gugino.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Christine Elmore, who's the right wing, like she's all right, but she's got the Benoists about her. She's a little bit too lightweight for what's happening. But also you look at a lot of Fox News reporters anyway, and she's probably not too far off the mark from what's being asked there. And then Natasha Benham, like it sort of seems as though she's just one thing, Simon. Just one thing. So she's supposed to be this vlogger who's out there on a campaign trail. One, there's no real indication as to how serious they actually take her as a presence on the campaign trail. The journalists seem to mock her a little bit, but don't really know much about her. And you don't get a sense of the actual political flux really giving her much gravity. Like you don't understand why she's there other than the fact that she's just there. And then she keeps doing these really magical things every so often. There's a sequence in the first episode where there's a small-scale riot, a little skirmish that breaks out on a university campus. And while she's doing her live piece to camera, first of all, I don't think that there's a single person who's a TikTok influencer who can record an entire piece to camera in one shot, which she manages to do. Like there's no cutting, there's nothing taking place there. But there's a scene where she moves her phone over and seamlessly, not even knowing where it is, she managed to zoom in on a sign and zoom out on a phone without even having to think about it. Like, she's magic, Simon. She's magic. Sorry,
right.
Go on.
Okay. 2 quick points. We have spoken previously on the podcast about how there's been a real dearth of shows about journalists and the journalist's role and allowing narratives to comment on current affairs if they would just sort of embrace what journalists do and use them as an in point for that kind of social satire or social commentary. And I should admit, and I should say up front, I haven't seen this as yet, although I'm quite excited to. Is that sort of opportunity not taken up by this series?
Okay, so when you and I have been talking about that, we're after TV shows that show journalists doing their work. Basically, all the scenes in this show the journalists before they do their work and after they do their work, and are sitting around waiting for their work to start. So probably case in point, in the very first episode, so I've seen the first 2, which are actually available. They dropped 2 episodes for night 1. You can find it here on Binge, and in the US it's Max Original, so it's streaming on Max. So you can find those first 2 episodes. But in the first episode, Carla Gugino disappears to, I think it's Chicago or Boston from the campaign trail. They're in Iowa. So they're at the very beginning of the campaign. She disappears, and ostensibly it's to take her daughter to university because she's gone to college for the first time. And so that's the excuse. But also on the college campus is someone that Gugino needs to interview. So she goes and does that when she's there. But she does that all off camera, and you don't really see any of that. So you don't see them doing the legwork or the actual act of the job. It's very much sort of a glossy idea as to what a 15-year-old may think is happening with journalists out on a campaign trail.
And my second point is that, and I'm doing this from memory, so if I get this wrong, please forgive me, but it is from the team, or certainly the creatives that did The Flight Attendant, which also took as the basis a job that we all kind of have an idea of what's being done, but spins it off into the young flight attendant's life, also uses an imaginary character, or in that case, a dead character that comes back and talks to the main character, like you mentioned, happens to Sadie in this. It was enjoyable and had the murder mystery sort of veneer to it that helped it be enjoyable. Are we asking too much of the team behind The Flight Attendant to go big and current and quite political with their version of what journalists do when they're all together?
Well, 2 things. I don't really quite know where you've kind of crossed the line with The Flight Attendant, because the person behind this one is, first of all, you got the reporter whose book this is based off. And she's an interesting character, but we won't go into that because it kind of just gets a bit dismissive in a way that I don't really want to come across here. But the TV talent who's really behind this is Julie Plec. And she's a woman behind many failed shows over the years. Like, she had a lot of success with The Vampire Diaries back in the day, but she's also just had a bunch of other sort of CW level, youth orientated sort of genre dramas. is probably her specialty. She's interesting in that she's always got a show up, but I don't think any of them have really ever been particularly that good, is the consideration.
Okay.
But if you want to draw a comparison for whatever reasons to the flight attendant, the argument to be made is that for the flight attendant to work, you don't actually need to care anything about the professional realities of the day-to-day of being a flight attendant. I think you can take some liberties there and not really have it impact the story. But with this one, journalism really is at the absolute core of the premise of the show. And unless you get that journalism right, and for the journalism to be right, it needs to reflect both the actual job that these professionals do, but then also the operating environment that they're in. And if the operating environment is politics, it needs to feel politically real and actually connected to the politics of the moment. And if you don't want to do the politics of the moment, you can't necessarily steep the reality of this show in things that are adjacent to our politics of the moment. So it needs to be either far removed or it needs to actually be isolated in a... What they've done is this hodgepodge that just doesn't feel authentic and takes away from what could actually be a really fun and engaging TV show. I can see the world where this would actually be a show that I'd be super excited to watch. It might be a slightly sort of dirty little secret pleasure that I have that I would have no qualms at all about telling the world how into it I am. Yeah. But it's just not there. There's just no real substance to this. It's an empty, vacuous TV program, and it's a real shame.
Speaking of empty and vacuous, it's time for the intermission.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
All right, I came up with this one on the fly not long before we pre-recording this podcast, and I've given it the heading of "When the Vanity Fair Hollywood Issue Gets It Wrong." Now, a couple of weeks ago, the annual Vanity Fair Hollywood Issue came out, always in time with the Oscars. I've got a collection of them dating back to when they were first published back in 1995. It stands high and proud in my man cave. I don't have a man cave. But the Vanity Fair Hollywood Issue cover shoot has always been considered the barometer of the day and date star power. Who's big right then? At the time of the shoot, the celebs dressed up for the lens of photographers like Fran Liebowitz or Herb Ritts. They're the hottest actors of that year, or certainly of that sort of half year. But then what happens? And I thought we might have a look back at some of the Vanity Fair covers. There's a list. There's a link provided for you there to have a look at, and see who maybe drifted from the public gaze, who went on to bigger and better things, who stayed a big star, but who kind of faded away. Dan Barrett, what are your thoughts on this as a midsection?
Look, I mean, I think that this is so culturally pervasive. I didn't know this was a thing up until this very opening to the segment.
The Vanity Fair Hollywood Issue? Are you kidding? You've never read, never folded out the Hollywood Issue cover?
No, I've never. No. No, Simon.
Wow, this is an all Simon intermission. I'm very excited by this. Let's go all the way back to 1995, which was the now quite iconic, maybe even a little bit infamous cover that featured a lot of the hot actresses of the time, and by that I mean both in industry terms and very attractive actresses in varying degrees of lingerie. You've got Jennifer Jason Leigh, you've got Al Nicole, you've got Uma Thurman, and then there in the middle fold out, you've got a young actress named Linda Fiorentino. She was really hot stuff back in the late 90s, early to late 90s. She'd starred in a number of very cool indie films. She'd worked with Scorsese on After Hours. She was just coming off Men in Black, but she... at the start of the 2000s, decided to give up acting and hasn't been in anything for 20-odd years, 25 years now. So certainly peaked industry-wise with her Vanity Fair cover shoot. But yeah, you remember Linda Fiorentino, of course.
I mean, I remember her, but, not for really anything good. So, I mean, she was in Jade. I remember in Men in Black, I think she was in Dogma, which might have been one of the last films she did. I know, look, I probably know her best from, there was a really good season of the, you might remember this, or you must remember this podcast, where they looked at the erotic films of the 80s and 90s. Oh, sure. And Linda Fiorentino was a, well-covered actor within that documentary series.
She made her name in a film called The Last Seduction, which was one of the sort of kickstarters for the very sexy sort of 90s erotic thrillers. So, yeah, but she did a lot of work, and all the way back to Vision Quest. Wow, what a name. Or Crazy in Love, as it was called
Look,
out here. But yeah,
I would actually argue that The Last Seduction was probably more towards the end of the erotic films, the 80s through 90s, because when you start hitting the mid-90s, that's where you start hitting into films like Jade, which he was also in. So, you know, suddenly the lower quality heading straight to direct-to-video sort of stuff of the era.
Then let's jump ahead to 1996. Now, Vanity Fair answered a bit of the complaints about having this all-girl cover for their launch issue by having an all-male cover in 1996. And you had your young Matthew McConaughey's and your very young Leonardo DiCaprio's in the mix there. A young actor named Will Smith was also there. But you've got two which have since kind of fallen off the radar. Well, one very much so, a young actor called Jonathan Schaech, Schaech. Terrible name. Great name. Good on you, Jonathan. And another actor called Skeet Ulrich. Now, Jonathan Schaech came out here to Australia to make Welcome to Whoop Whoop, the film that was the follow-up for the director of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Stephen Elliott. And it died a terrible death everywhere and got some of the worst reviews of the Australian film industry's history. Skeet Ulrich, on the other hand, was on a real upward curve. He'd done Scream. He'd done As Good as It Gets. He was a very in-demand actor, but decided to turn his back on Hollywood because of a number of issues from back in the day. He had mental health issues and decided to go and live on a farm somewhere for many years, and only in recent years has sort of come back into the limelight. So these are two actors who had a profile enough to negotiate a Vanity Fair cover shoot, but who have since gone down very different career paths.
So look, I know Jonathan from being the kind of, I guess, the dick character from That Thing You Do. He's the one that's dating the Liv Tyler character. And sort of breaks the band up effectively. So he's also a little bit interested in that. I think his interests were maybe a little bit more darker edged in some of the movies he was interested in doing. I don't think he wants to play the Hollywood game so much, and he's never really been good at that. So I think anytime he tried sort of doing that, things never really quite played well. But he sort of settled into a career as not quite a character actor, but certainly someone who has never really stopped working, and you know, he's always a presence. But you can find him in a lot of TV work, but he did a fair bit of work with, and I'm trying to think of the name of the director now. Sorry, I'm just furiously just trying to go through Wikipedia, trying to connect to what was it? So, oh gosh, what is the? I'm just kind of thinking of the name. The guy that directed the Doom Generation, which this guy was in, Greg Araki. I think he kind of plays around like Araki sort of orbit to a certain degree.
Sure. Yep, all good stuff. And Skeet Ulrich, he's kind of bounced back a little bit. He's had some TV and film success of late as well. So he's a name. He was a very talented young actor and had to take some time off. So good to see him back amongst it. Now, this was a strange one for me. In 1998, as part of the Vanity Fair 1998 cover, is Edward Furlong. Now, I only really know Edward Furlong from Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and that was in the early 90s, 92. So how he managed to sneak a third fold-in section cover spot here, I had to actually look up as to what he might have been in 1998 that saw him have any sort of profile enough to get on the Vanity Fair cover. And it was a little film called American History X, which he did with Edward Norton, which was going through a whole lot of terrible reshoots and fights with the director and fights with the studios. And Edward Furlong had like third billing in that, which I'd totally forgotten about. But it was and when you have a look at his IMDb listing from 1998, from American History X onwards, it's dire. In fact, just earlier this week, I saw a photo of Edward Furlong with a very sick-looking Ron Jeremy, porn star and accused rapist Ron Jeremy at an LA cafe. So he's hanging with quite the crowd, old Edward Furlong. Probably got the Vanity Fair cover shoot pinned up on his wall.
Yeah, sure.
Now, two actresses in 1999 that made a big splash, had a kind of hot industry buzz about them, but for varying degrees also disappeared a little bit. Monica Potter, who I know from Con Air as being Nicolas Cage's wife in Con Air, and a couple of rom-coms along the way, and young Lily Sobieski, who sort of dropped on the scene and had a little bit of a look about her that people were saying, oh, the next Meryl Streep or the next, Jodie Foster or whatever. But it never quite came together for Lily in a way that many of us thought it would. Now, I should point out both are still working actors, but the big sort of stardom kind of eluded them.
Look, I mean, Monica Potter, probably not quite to the heights of when she sort of broke as an actor in that mid-90s period, but she's been a regular fixture on TV, so I don't think there's probably many years where she hasn't been working on a series. Sure, Notable series are probably things like Boston Legal, Parenthood, Wisdom of the Crowd. She's suddenly been plugging away. Trust Me, I think she was in that for a while.
And with a solid fan base as well. Everyone I talk to really likes Monica Potter. She's become a little bit of an LA fixture as well. She has a lot of charity work and is very, very well regarded within the industry. So that's always a plus. Lily, I actually don't know what's happened to Lily lately. She had I think she did a Joan of Arc story that was kind of butchered. And she never really graduated past a bit of a high point in the late 90s there.
Okay. Can we speed through some of these, Simon?
Yeah, for sure. Paula Patton in 2012 peaked, I guess, with the Precious series, with the Precious movie a few years ago. She got a whole lot of award buzz out of that. 2017, Janelle Monáe. I think she's pivoted a bit more towards music, so she still has a high Hollywood profile, but she was, and of course she had the co-starring role in Glass Onion last year, so still working, but maybe not sort of at the level that we thought that would be. And then last year, Vanity Fair made quite the boo-boo, and a lot of his problems happened in the changeover period from shooting for the cover to publishing the cover. One, Jonathan Majors, who the wheels have really fallen off his career for some well-documented indiscretions with his ex-partner. So doesn't always work out, the Vanity Fair Hollywood cover shoot for the stars, and sometimes it's their own undoing. So that was our intermission. Dan Barrett, what else have you been watching?
What else have I been watching? Where does one begin? I've been watching so much stuff. So, look, one of the things that I was juggling the idea of is, do I talk about Girls on a Bus this week, or do I talk about Manhunt? And I went with Girls on a Bus only because I thought there was just a little bit more to talk about there, although as I was saying it out loud, I found there wasn't. Manhunt, it's the new Apple TV Plus drama, and this is described as a thriller, which I think is a slight misnomer. It's about we'll say a week to, I think it's like maybe about 10 or 15 days that followed the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, who you may remember was a fairly popular president from the United States of America, Simon.
Oh, I know of him. I liked his hat.
Yeah, really good hat, very good beard, like really strong beard presence. But anyway, you may remember poor Abe Lincoln was in fact assassinated and at no point hunted vampires like some recent Hollywood interpretations may have suggested. So this is a series which, as the name of the show suggests, it's the manhunt to try to find John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators who were involved in the assassination.
Interesting.
So your main character in it is played by Tobias Menzies. He plays Edward Stanton. I'll admit I didn't actually know Edwin Stanton before I started watching this, but he was the Secretary of War. He was very close to Lincoln, supposedly, and obviously because he's the Secretary of War at the time, they were literally just days after having signed the paperwork that ended the war. So he was obviously a key figure within American politics at the time. But it's pretty much him that is running the manhunt to try to find the assassin. Okay, so you got him. There's a guy named Anthony Boyles who plays John Wilkes Booth. I don't really know him. But there's a couple of other names and at least faces that people certainly know, if not by name. So probably the biggest name is Patton Oswalt. And he plays Lafayette Baker, who is... the military character who's actually really running the manhunt. He's really prominent in the second episode onwards. But the one that kind of really just caught my attention was playing Abraham Lincoln is Hamish Linklater. Now, Hamish Linklater, do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't think I do. Maybe if I saw his face, but I don't think I do. I will have a quick look while you're talking.
You 100% know him by face. So he's best known probably from being in the sitcom with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, The New Adventures of Old Christine. He played her brother in that. But you've seen him in a whole bunch of things, notably not too long ago, Midnight Mass, a TV series that both of us loved.
I saw his face.
But
absolutely.
Every year he's in a notable drama or series or something along the way. Like, everybody knows Hamish Linklater, even if you don't quite know him. Now, what I thought was particularly interesting about his performance here is I'd never met Abraham Lincoln. That may be a surprise to you. There's not really a whole lot of footage or audio recordings of him. Like, there's certainly recordings of him. Like, they exist, okay? But, like, it's not like there's a whole bunch. So, like, what did Lincoln really sound like? You and I, like, neither of us really know. As far as I was concerned before watching Manhunt, like, he just sounded like Daniel Day-Lewis. Like, I was cool with that.
Well, yes, but Daniel Day-Lewis did a bit of research into where Abraham Lincoln was born and where he grew up, and that's why he had in the film a fairly high-pitched voice, and there was some criticism about why would Daniel Day-Lewis choose to do that voice for Abraham Lincoln, but it was all based on a whole lot of research that he had a sort of thing, and that's what he did. So I don't know if Linklater goes down that path. He certainly got the look for it. I can absolutely see him in that role.
Yeah, well, Linklater absolutely goes down that path and does the same voice, which I think is hilarious. What's notable with Linklater, as I did some research while I was watching the program, his father was a linguist or did something in terms of vocal work. So, you know, I'm sure this is probably work that is very dear to him to a certain degree. So, you know, I'm sure he put in his work there, and he does affect a very similar accent. The thing is, though, and it's probably with that accent and with Linklater as Lincoln, that the show really sort of, I wouldn't say it ever feels creaky, but it feels like it's less than it probably should be. So you watch him, and he feels like he's a subscale Daniel Day-Lewis, which is a bit unfortunate because I really like Hamish Linklater. I think he's a very strong addition to anything that he's in. But he doesn't quite have that gravitas, and also the production itself doesn't really have that same cinematic feeling that you really got from the film Lincoln. It's not fair that we draw that comparison point, but when you start watching this, like, it's unfair, but also when you're watching this, it's like, I just kind of wish this was something a little bit more. And here's where I think that unfortunate comparison comes into it. So the first two episodes of this are directed by Carl Franklin. And Carl Franklin absolutely knows how to direct something. Sure. Carl Franklin, probably best known for Devil in a Blue Dress, I'd say is his biggest achievement. But, you know, you've certainly, even if you haven't seen that film, you've more than likely seen a Carl Franklin film before. He's been around for years and years, and he's very adept and really quite good. But with this one, he just films things very, very traditionally, and it just kind of feels like it's... You've got lots of people walking around in fancy waistcoats and nice tall hats and whatnot, and just considering the era that it's in and considering the place, like, it's hard to divorce the visual style of this away from what they did in Lincoln because it's just so very similar. It's a lot of very sort of similar pacing, and it just feels of a piece with that. And I couldn't help feeling while watching that this show would actually be so much better served if they picked up the pace on it. It's supposed to be a political thriller, a conspiracy thriller, as they're exploring the small group of men that were responsible for the assassination. Why not really sort of play into, like, the possibility of a high-pitched conspiracy thriller, but set in, gosh, and this is where I should have done my research, like 1864? Thereabouts, give or take about 10 years. Point. Yeah, okay. But, like, that would be really fun. Like, you would just assume from the fact that it's a Lincoln thing that it would be presented in the style that it's presented in within Manhunt. Why not play around with form and structure a little bit? And that probably means not hiring Carl Franklin for it, because Carl Franklin's very good at doing what this is. But, like, I don't know, it just feels like there's something that there should be more of, and it's just not really quite there. That said, I watched the first 2 episodes, which I think are actually both streaming now on Apple TV Plus. 7 episodes all up. It is very good. It's just you kind of wish it was just a little bit more, a little bit different.
What else have I been watching? I'm glad you asked. I went along to one of the very few cinemas that is screening Miller's Girl.
What's your name?
Cairo Sweet.
I'm Mr. Miller. I'm assuming that you got one of these before.
I read the whole list.
Well, there's 12 books on that list.
Party hard.
Yep.
Miller's Girl is the new film starring Martin Freeman as an academic, an author who's turned to teaching, and Jenna Ortega as the young student who finds herself attracted to him and then he to her. And before you know it, a whole lot of complications ensue that cross several of society's taboo lines, as it can be said. I should point out there's been a lot of controversy about this film showing some graphic moments between the 2 actors. That doesn't really come to much. There's a moment where you're not quite sure if it's a dream or if it isn't a dream, and there is some intimacy there, but it's all fully clothed on. It's more sort of the pearl-clutching conservatives who are looking at a film like this and saying, oh, we shouldn't make movies like Lolita or David Mamet's Oleana, which is the film that this wants to be, but unfortunately isn't. You have Ortega as this young woman left alone in her first year of college. She's living alone while her parents travel. She develops this infatuation with the author played by Martin Freeman, who I'm not a big fan of as an actor. He's kind of twitchy and you kind of see what he's doing. He seems a little bit miscast, well, pretty much in everything he does, but certainly in this. They have this awkward chemistry. I never quite got why she would be attracted to him in anything other than maybe an intellectual way. But then that is kind of derailed halfway through the film, and I was just a little bit left off center, that left out as to why this was even happening. Having said that, it's a beautiful looking film. It's all shot in Louisiana. It's all given that sweaty kind of swamp feel, bit of Tennessee Williams thrown in there. The influences and the origins of this kind of story are very much in this deep South taboo kind of lifestyle that is depicted in the film. Other great actresses in there is Dagmara I can never say her name, Dominovich from Succession. She plays Martin Freeman's wife and has a couple of big moments when she's on the bottle and gets to find out exactly what he may or may not have been up to. It kind of plays out how you think it will play out, so there's no big surprises there, apart from a couple of committed performances. And Jenna Ortega is very good in this. I can see why this is floating around the 30% mark on Rotten Tomato. There's a lot of opportunities here that the film doesn't explore, and the ones that it does explore, it does with a fairly sort of salacious look and feel. So it's called Miller's Girl, a fairly small release for a film with a fairly major star in it, but it'll find an audience when it hits the home viewing market.
Yeah, I don't like Martin Freeman either.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's something twitchy, or he seems very mannered on screen. I'm always feel like he's never really inside a character. He's just going through the motions a little bit. There's an inauthenticity about him.
Yeah, like I don't wish the guy ill. Like he doesn't
I do.
rankle me that much, but
no, I don't either.
Okay.
He was as good as a Hobbit.
I mean, I'll take your word for it. I didn't see it. Look, I saw him as much of the Hobbit movies as I've read Vanity Fair magazine for, my entire life. One other thing I wanted to mention, Simon, is Academy Award-winning movie, American Fiction.
This book. What really struck me was that too few books were about my people. Where are our stories? Where's our representation?
Would you give us the pleasure of reading an excerpt?
Yo, Sharonda, girl, you be pregnant again? If I is, Ray Ray is gonna be a real father this time around. Thank you.
So, Simon, neither of us saw this before the Academy Awards. Actually, that's not true. I watched it before the Academy Awards, but just the night before.
The night before.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you sent me a text, and I was just hours away from watching it myself. So that was, coincidental. Simon, I mean, first of all, you liked it. I was a big fan of this film. It was probably one of my favorites of the year.
Yeah, it was not what I was expecting. It had a lightness of touch to it. It tackled some really big issues in a very fun way. In fact, I think I said to you, it's like and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble, but it's like a Black James L. Brooks film. It looked at media, it looked at love, romance, and it reminded me of broadcast news to a certain extent, but also a lot more other things as well. I don't want to sort of frame it as a white person story, because it's very much not that. The way it handles race and race in American society is just brilliant and very, very funny at times.
Yeah, I think that a story like this, so the entire premise of it is that you've got this guy who goes by the name of Monk. He's played by Jeffrey Wright. And the reason his name is Monk is that his first name is Thelonious. And so, as a young man, someone just started calling him Monk, and I guess he ran with it. So he's a novelist who's been working for a university, and I guess probably his day-to-day frustration at not being able to get his second novel published has probably been wearing on him somewhat. I'm sure that we've seen versions of that story before. If anything, I mean, Wonder Boys comes very much to mind. In fact, this is like... Yeah, if you want a double feature, like this and Wonder Boys is probably a very nice pairing. But anyway, he's a frustrated guy. He's butting up against some of the wokeness that's coming through from some of his students at the university. Says a few things that he probably shouldn't. And look, I mean, he's coming at this from being a black man, and I think his frustration at a white woman telling him what language he can and can't use is probably somewhat frustrating to him. Certainly appreciate that. So anyway, he ends up having to return home for reasons we don't really need to get into. But there's stuff that keeps him at home for a little while longer than he really plans. And while he's there, he starts getting really frustrated at a very popular writer of the moment, played by Issa Rae, who is writing stuff that he feels is inauthentic to who she is and inauthentic to what he views as the Black experience. So he ends up writing a book which is kind of a bit of a parody. It's really just him being angry one night and saying, this is, a reaction to that book. I'm going to do the exact same thing that she has. He ends up handing it to his publisher, who starts sending it around the place, and he ends up being way more successful than he's ever been at any other point in his professional career, with a book where... Can we say the name of the book on the podcast, Simon?
We'll lose our explicit free rating on iTunes, but knock yourself out.
We'll lose our good standing in the community. Look, we're not going to say the word out loud. It's a very bold title that he suggests as a complete lark, because he thinks this thing is getting like just ridiculous. But for some reason, all the white people seem to really love this book that he wrote, and that's kind of what it is. It's a low-key character drama about a guy who's just really frustrated with the way that he is rightly and wrongly perceived in the world, and the way that he rightly and wrongly perceives the world in turn. It's a parody of the media. It's a parody of human relationships right now, and the way that the media kind of is framed, the way that a lot of us sort of do engage with one another. It's a smart, clever drama. I'm not entirely sure I would have chosen this as the best original screenplay of the year. I think it's very good, but I'm not sure that it's probably not... The screenplay isn't what I really liked about the movie. I think what I really liked about it really came down to direction and the performances. And I'll say this in terms of the performances. One, there's a lot of people that I really like in this movie. So Jeffrey Wright, I've really liked for, about 20 odd years now. Sterling K. Brown, I've really enjoyed ever since we first saw him in the People vs. OJ mini. That's when we first really noticed him. Erica Alexander, I've seen in sitcoms over the years for, most of my life. Issa Rae, I'm a huge fan of. Adam Brody, I really like. Leslie Uggams. But the one person, John Ortiz is in there, and I loved John Ortiz. Keith David's got a single scene in it. It's probably the worst scene. I'm getting my scenes confused completely. No, Keith David's fantastic in it. He's playing the local, is he police? Is he like a security guard?
No, Keith David was the imagined character who...
he was the imagined. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking initially. Yeah, no, that's the worst scene in the movie. They didn't need to do that.
Oh, no, that was
awful.
That was very funny. No, it was great.
Who played the guy that the house?
Maynard.
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was, but it was.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
thought all the casting was terrific. Yeah.
I was going to say, the one person that I really just can't stand, like anytime that she's in something, anytime I'm exposed to her, she just rankles me in a really just severe way. And there's no specific reason. It's just, every so often there's an actor which you just can't sort of glow onto. Tracy Ellis Ross. Okay. Anytime she's in it, she just ruins everything for me. I went and saw Conan. Like, I went to Los Angeles. I got the chance to see Conan. And not only was it her, but it was another guy that I can't think of the guy's name right now. It really doesn't matter. But it was like the two most hated people I've got in my world. That isn't what's his name from what's the chunky guy who does a voice in Frozen and every other musical at the moment? He was in the
Josh
Book of Mormon.
Gad.
Gad. Oh my God, that guy.
Oh, you've mentioned him a few times. The Tracy Ellis thing is new. I didn't know you were an anti-Traceite, but you've mentioned Josh Gad on a few occasions and how your tummy turns at the mention of his name.
When it's like a female actor like that, I don't want to come across as like sort of a gendered gross sort of thing. It's just I don't like her. Like it's just something that really bothers me with her. But anyway, she's in this, and I didn't hate her in this. It's the only time I've never hated her in anything. Okay, so that to me, if I was going to give 5 stars to American Fiction, which on Letterboxd I only gave it 4.5 stars, so I didn't give it 5 stars. But if I was going to put it out there and say 5 stars, didn't hate Tracy Ellis Ross, that'd be my entire review.
All right, so American Fiction, which I found turned up on Amazon around Oscar time. I was sort of hanging out to see it later on, but it's free to watch on, not free to watch because you're paying for Amazon, but it's on Amazon as we speak. So do try and catch up with it. Not getting an Australian cinema release, so it's the only chance you'll have to see it, and it should be seen. Dan Barrett, let's get to This Week in History. All right, my friend. I've challenged myself this week not to get any wrong, which I think is a high benchmark for me. March 17, 1997, CNN broadcast for the first time in what language?
March 1997.
17.
Yeah. So like the full show was broadcast in this language, or is it like a launch into a new market?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've really done your research on this one. Not unreasonable questions, I wouldn't think, Simon. But anyway, gosh, what would it be? 1997. I feel that's roughly around... No, that's not quite right. That was 2 years later. I was thinking about Hong Kong going back to China, but I think that was with 2000, wasn't it?
Good guess.
Am I like in a ballpark?
No. Not even on the right
okay.
continent.
Yeah, no, I've got no idea. What is it?
Spanish. They broadcast for the first time in Spanish. March 20,
that's really
2000. Yeah, it isn't. I thought that was very late in the game for CNN, but they're all whiteys there. March 20, 2012. Which film does Disney announce a $200 million write-down on after it flops spectacularly upon release? March 20, 2012.
Look, I feel we talked about this on a podcast last week or the week before. This would surely be John Carter.
You're exactly right. I thought that was quite the coincidence when it popped up on my reference website, and there it was. Yes, it was John Carter starring Taylor Kitsch. Remember when he was something for a little while too, and he had John Carter, and then he had Battleship, and everybody went, "All right, that's enough Taylor Kitsch for now."
Well, he was the big breakout from Friday Night Lights.
Friday Night Lights, yes, he was. He was, and he's still doing.
Also,
work.
star of True Detective too.
Yeah, and I think he was in Savages, that Oliver Stone film. But anyway, finally, March 21, 1990. What was the name of the short-lived sitcom that premiered on this day, starring sitcom royalty Valerie Bertinelli from One Day at a Time and a very young Matthew Perry?
Okay, I'm like 98% sure this is called Sydney, or is like a bit of a further like name on the title, but I'm just going to say Sydney.
It is Sydney, also starring Mr. Seinfeld, Barney Martin, and an actor we both like called Craig Bierko, another actor who didn't really go on to much, or is doing a lot of character work rather than leading man roles. But yeah, Sydney had a lot of buzz about it. but unfortunately lasted a whopping 13 episodes. One of the many Matthew Perry failed sitcom endeavours over the years. He'd had a heap of them, and Sydney was definitely one of them.
Okay. That probably means that we get to move on to This Week in History.
No, we just did This Week in History, you knucklehead. We're doing
Wait,
birthday quiz.
birthdays. Which also happened in history.
Well, that's very true. Birthday quiz.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
Drop in.
Checkmate.
All right, a lot of big stars in this week's birthday quiz. Can you link them somehow? March 19, 1955, Bruce Willis. March 19, 1947, Glenn Close. March 21, 1962, Rosie O'Donnell. And March 21, 1962, Ferris Bueller himself, the great Matthew Broderick. What could these notable names, these birthday buddies, all have in common?
So this is another one of these things where I absolutely know what it is they have in common, even though I can't link all of them just off the top of my head. But it's all going to be monkey related. So going through the Matthew Broderick, Project X appeared as opposite a chimpanzee. Bruce Willis faced off against the army of the 12 monkeys. You also had Glenn Close, who I can't pick, but I do know that why did her name just drop out of my head then? O'Donnell. Rosie O'Donnell appeared as a animated monkey in some Disney film at some point.
Oh my God, Dan Barrett. You're close. You've said Disney film, which is kind of in the ballpark. So all these actors have appeared in live action versions of old cartoons.
Okay, so I'm just typing in Glenn Close monkey now because there's got to be a connection.
Oh, and I'll run through what the answer is, and then you can make up your one
sorry.
at that end.
Can I draw your attention to 1995's The Plague Monkeys with Glenn Close?
The Plague Monkeys? That's good.
Yep.
Can you, if you get, look, I'll give you a pass mark if you can put a finger on Rosie O'Donnell's monkey. Boy, that's going to get back, that quote.
Yeah, be careful on that one, sir.
Yeah, I know. Let me run through the answers that I had. They all starred in live-action versions of animated films. Glenn Close was in 101 Dalmatians. Matthew Broderick was in Inspector Gadget. Rosie O'Donnell was in the Flintstones movies. And Bruce Willis was in G.I. Joe Retaliation. I thought I might have got a bit of kickback on the G.I. Joe because there was some talk of it being based on the toy, but apparently the G.I. Joe films were specifically based on the Saturday morning cartoons. So I'm going to take that as a win for me. So there you go. Did you find a Rosie O'Donnell monkey?
Let me take you to a little year called 1999. Walt Disney's Tarzan. She played the monkey character Turk.
It's good enough for me, mate. You have done amazing work. That's a great answer. Good for you. I'm going to give it to you. They can be monkeys or have starred opposite monkeys. Yes, he did do Project X, didn't he? I love Project X. Were there any actual monkeys in 12 Monkeys?
I feel there might have been a monkey in like the sequence where all the zoo creatures were let out.
Oh, with the bear.
I'm sure there would have been monkeys.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have a free the animals sequence without monkeys.
I've got a feeling you're like not chimps, but like you just got some little monkeys just running around at some point. I'm pretty sure there's monkeys in there, but regardless, there's an army of 12 monkeys. I'm going for it.
No, that's fine. Let's call it a draw. We both did good there. Well done. Screen watching on Facebook at Screen Watching Podcast. At Screen Watching Podcast on Facebook, on both Threads and on the YouTube. We're at Screen Watching. And you can email us with your thoughts and views and things we should talk about. Email us your views on what our next intermission should be. Maybe you should come up with some of these. screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. And you can read my stuff on screen-space.net, where I give a bit of a rundown of the new some of the films in the French Film Festival, which is happening around Australia. Dan, where can you be seen and heard?
Look, I can be seen many places. Walking the streets, doing my spoken beat poetry around the place, like all that's regularly on the go. More specifically, though, if people want to check out alwaysbewatching.com, It's got some discussions about the day's news regarding the screen industry. That's mostly streaming TV, but a little bit of regular TV and some movies and some video games and virtual reality and other stuff that is just relevant and interesting to your day. So you can find that as a newsletter delivered free to your inbox Monday through Friday at alwaysbewatching.com. And then I do a weekly newsletter for my members, the people that support the newsletter, and that's called Always Be Streaming. And it's a TV guide effectively to your weekend streaming. So when you hit Friday evening, Saturday morning, whenever I manage to get the newsletter out, you can sit down, you can see an entire guide as to what's available to click play on right then, the new movies and the new to streaming films. Sorry, the new TV shows and the new to streaming films. Just sitting there waiting for you to watch and revel in.
It's a must read for me every morning. It really is.
Yeah.
I'm serious, it is.
Yeah, thanks. Look, people are very complimentary to it. Like anyone who regularly reads it does find a lot of value in it. And I always say it's the newsletter that I would read if I wasn't writing it, because it's kind of written with, just what I think is the most important things every day to get across.
Sure. Good points, well made. Next week, we'll be talking about the new Sydney Sweeney film Immaculate, which I was fortunate enough to have seen last night as we record this, and boy, is it a piece of work, but we'll have a chat about that next week. You're going to try and get around to the new Annette Bening series, and maybe some other stuff.
Simon, also,
there's a lot of TV at the moment.
No, it's a really heavy TV month, so I wasn't able to get to those shows this week. And I'm concerned I won't get to it next week because, as I mentioned, I might talk about Palm Royale next week. Also, 3 Body Problem debuts next week. So that's something I'm pretty likely to try to get across as much as I can before we record. So there's those, and there may be 1 or 2 other things I just haven't got it committed to memory right now. So there's just a lot of stuff happening at the moment.
Yeah, exciting. All right, Dan Barrett, thanks for a fun podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm going to go away and wash myself now.